Join hosts Alex and Artie in the Defense Report Room for sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover a really high-stakes question. Is the current path to peace merely a blueprint for the next inevitable war?
It really is the core controversy right now. And, our sources have revealed some pretty stunning proposals. We're seeing major powers float these negotiation plans that involve massive concessions, things like acknowledging Crimea as de jure Russian territory, treating huge occupied zones as de facto Russian, and then, get this, coupling all of that with full amnesty for war crimes.
That sets the stakes incredibly high. I mean, for Ukraine and for its Western allies. But here's the twist, right? Despite the fact that this is, well, arguably the best deal Moscow could hope for, they aren't rushing to the table. They're not taking the win.
Exactly. And you have to ask why. It's because the war has settled into this brutal positional stalemate where Moscow genuinely believes that time is on its side. Their domestic economy, their public opinion, it's all paradoxically adapted. And that gives the Kremlin the confidence to wait. So today, we'll unpack that exact calculus, and then we're going to dissect the immense 3,000-kilometer technological challenge of making any future ceasefire actually stick.
So our mission in this deep dive is to extract that essential critical knowledge from all the recent analyses on these conflict dynamics and the negotiation strategies. We're giving you a shortcut to being well-informed, a clear, comprehensive understanding of what's driving this whole diplomatic deadlock.
And we really encourage you to follow our work. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the military reality on the ground, because that reality, well, it dictates the temperature of any peace talk.
No.
And for the past year, the battlefield has basically been a positional stalemate. Neither side has made any kind of significant breakthrough.
And that's the definition of modern attrition warfare. The front line is this massive web of layered fortifications, and everything is being watched by drones. It's created a highly lethal kill zone.
How wide are we talking?
Roughly 15 to 20 kilometers wide. It makes any large maneuver by heavy armor, which you need for a breakthrough, it makes it nearly suicidal.
So it sounds like Russia has just fully leaned into that old grinding logic of attrition. Their losses are immense, arguably much higher than Ukraine's.
Much higher.
But Moscow just sees this as a war of endurance. They're grinding away not just to capture a town, but to wear down Ukraine's military and, maybe more importantly, to wear down Western willingness to keep supporting Kyiv.
And that very calculus of attrition is precisely what drove those contentious U.S. peace proposals we've seen, specifically the plans floated around April and November of 2025. I mean, these marked a really significant and, I'd say, painful shift in the U.S. position. The terms were drastic.
Okay, let's break them down. The territorial components first. What exactly was on the table?
The proposal suggested acknowledging Crimea as de jure part of Russia. And this is not just, a practical recognition. De jure means legally recognizing it. That sets a catastrophic international precedent.
It undermines the whole post-World War II order, right? The idea that you can't just take territory by force.
Exactly. And beyond Crimea, the current Russian-occupied territory in the 4 annexed provinces, Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia, would be acknowledged as de facto Russian. So, in essence, the plan carves up Ukraine. It forces Kyiv to give up its claims to the land Russia currently holds.
But the security guarantees, or maybe the lack of them, that's where this proposal really just fell apart. The fine print was incredibly damaging, as I recall.
It was. Ukraine would be barred from NATO. Its military would be limited in size. And the conditional U.S. security guarantee offered. It was so troubling. If Russia invades again, sanctions get reinstated. But here's the kicker. If Ukraine ever tries to retake its own territory and crosses into Russia, that whole guarantee is just gone.
So it basically makes Ukraine an asymmetrical guarantor of Russian security.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that's not even touching the idea of permanent blanket amnesty for war crimes for both Russian and Ukrainian leaders.
So why? Why would the U.S. even float an idea that's so, well, morally and legally compromising?
This is where our sources talk about the Manhattan real estate strategy. The U.S. approach seems to be prioritizing an immediate end to the bloodshed above everything else. It's like they see it not through the lens of justice or international law, but like a desperate deal that just needs a little shove to close before the next election cycle.
Regardless of the quality of the peace it produces.
It's transactional diplomacy at its most cynical, really.
And that transactional approach is exactly why Kyiv and Europe are sounding the alarm. I mean, Ukrainian leaders know that trading land for an unstable, humiliating peace is political suicide at home. They know Russia won't just stop with partial gains.
And the pressure from key European states, the UK, France, Germany, it's ramped up. They're pushing back hard against this kind of peace through weakness. They're reaffirming their support for Ukraine's territorial integrity because they're terrified that letting Russia profit from conquest today just guarantees a bigger war tomorrow.
Speaking of European pressure, there's this huge internal dilemma in the EU, isn't there? Over the, 140 billion in frozen Russian assets, most of it in Belgium?
Yeah, that's the financial leverage they're refusing to pull. The debate is about confiscating those assets to fund Ukraine's budget. It seems logical, but Belgium is strongly against it. They're worried it would cause irreversible reputational damage, that foreign investors would flee, and it could destabilize the euro itself. So the risk of using that financial weapon is seen as almost as great as the risk of Russia winning.
So the peace terms are deeply flawed, but you'd have to say they're still favorable to Moscow. The fact that Moscow isn't biting. It shows this incredible confidence they have in the long game. What's driving that?
It all comes down to their domestic calculus. Russia is, and our sources say, well-positioned to sustain this war effort for at least another 2 to 3 years, even with sanctions. They've learned to manage it.
How are they managing that level of economic sustainment against all these global sanctions?
It boils down to two things.
Yeah.
Massive state spending and pragmatic technocratic management. The Kremlin has basically replaced foreign investment by just pouring state money into its military-industrial complex. We're looking at projections where 40% of the 2025 federal budget is going to the military and security. Plus, they have low national debt and a steady supply chain from China, Iran, and North Korea.
So they've just converted their entire economy into a war machine. We hear about these staggering equipment losses. What was it, over 3,000 tanks lost? That's more than they had before the war.
Precisely. But while they lose that old legacy equipment, they are mass-producing modern, high-volume systems. Their defense industry is now reportedly able to make up to 30,000 Shahed-type drones a year. And that number could double by 2026. This lets them keep up this high-intensity attritional warfare. They can absorb losses while building up their next-gen capacity.
Which brings us to the second pillar of their confidence, this paradox of Russian public opinion. The polling data from August 2022 to August 2023 shows overall support for the war is still high, around 70 to 74%. That sounds overwhelming, but when you peel back the layers, the picture is a lot more fragile, isn't it?
It is. You have to look closer. The core group of strong, uncompromising supporters, the ones who say the war must definitely continue, that's only about 1/5 of the population, 22 to 26%. And crucially, these are predominantly retirement-aged men who face zero personal risk.
Right. It's easy to want a maximalist war when your son or husband isn't the one on the front line.
Yeah.
The regime support base isn't bearing the consequences.
That is the key psychological element. And while a big majority, 61 to 66%, say they want peace talks, they only want talks that result in victory gains. So they want peace, but on maximalist terms. No compromise, no return of territory.
They want the outcome of conquest without the ongoing cost of fighting. But that posture seems incredibly volatile. What happens when the reality of the war breaks through that shield?
Well, the data gives us the answer. External shocks cause a dramatic shift. We saw it with the partial mobilization in September 2022. It caused a swift, dramatic decline in public mood and instantly drove support for peace talks up from 44% to 57%. So the fear of direct personal involvement, it just shatters that carefully constructed facade of normalcy.
We've also seen some shifts inside the Kremlin itself, these purges that suggest they're preparing for a long, hard struggle.
Indeed. The effort to remove senior defense officials, military commanders, that's likely to continue. The sources suggest these recent arrests of deputy defense ministers. It's an FSB mopping up operation. It's not just about corruption. It's about targeting officials tied to the former defense minister, Shoigu. It's about seizing control of that enormous defense ministry budget and, assigning blame for the initial failures.
So it's about consolidating political and financial control over the entire war machine. But why is victory in Ukraine such an ultimate strategic imperative for them?
Because Russia fundamentally sees a victory in Ukraine as a prerequisite for being able to fight a potential conventional war with NATO later this decade. They believe winning in Ukraine would give them millions more people to mobilize and, critically, the industrial capacity and resources for that larger confrontation with the West. So they just can't accept any deal that doesn't deliver that ultimate strategic prize.
Since Moscow clearly isn't interested in a bad peace deal right now, we have to look ahead. Let's assume a durable peace could be negotiated in the future.
Yeah.
What would that even look like? The first step has to be avoiding the failures of the past, namely the Minsk agreements.
The Minsk agreements were, well, a perfect example of a ceasefire doomed to fail. They had three crippling flaws. First was textual ambiguity. They lacked clarity on basic things like precise geographic coordinates for security zones, which of course led to competing interpretations.
And no real enforcement.
Absolutely. The second flaw was a total lack of accountability. No mechanism to say who is responsible for a violation or to sanction them. And finally, and this is the most fundamental part, the agreements failed to address Russia's core security concerns, so Moscow had little incentive to comply in the first place.
Okay, so if we're designing a durable peace today, what are the components that absolutely must be there?
To succeed, a future ceasefire has to be a formal, legally binding treaty. Not some informal arrangement. It has to be highly specific, meticulously marking the ceasefire line to prevent what they call salami tactics.
Let's define salami tactics for everyone listening.
It's a term for aggressive, creeping expansion. So think of Russia taking these small, incremental military or political steps. A few meters here, a trench there. Each one is too small to trigger a major international crisis. But over time, they cumulatively shift the ceasefire line in their favor. Specificity in the agreement is how you prevent that.
The nature of war has also changed so dramatically since Minsk. The DMZ, the demilitarized zone, the requirements must be completely different now.
Oh, completely. Because of long-range strikes, precision artillery, and especially the ubiquity of UAVs, the DMZ would need to be much, much wider than past standards. We're talking far beyond the standard 2-kilometer estimate, maybe pushing it out to 50 or even 70 kilometers in some places.
And what are the implications of a DMZ that massive?
The political and logistical challenges are huge. A zone that wide means massive civilian relocation, creating a huge internal displacement crisis. And both sides would constantly contest the buffer zone. It could actually increase friction points, which is why robust confidence-building measures are non-negotiable. Mutual military inspections, on-site verification, third-party satellite surveillance.
That brings us to the final monumental challenge, the tech required to monitor a 3,000-kilometer front line. It spans everything from flat steppe to dense river areas to coastlines. Human monitors just can't do it.
No, it necessitates a reliance on advanced remote sensing. Drones, or UASs, are essential for covering large, dangerous areas like minefields. But both sides have sophisticated electronic warfare, so any monitoring plan has to assume you're going to lose a lot of drones.
Which is why persistent surveillance is so critical.
Yeah.
And this is where something like Aerostat's tethered balloons with cameras and radar become uniquely valuable. Why are they better suited here?
They offer that persistence. They can stay up for days or weeks at a time. And more importantly, they are significantly more durable and harder to defeat with electronic warfare than small drones. Because they're tethered, they have different signatures. They're the ideal tool for keeping constant eyes on those flat steppe regions or large urban areas. A fixed, reliable sensor in the sky.
And for the water boundaries, like the Dnipro River and the Black Sea coast.
There you need specialized maritime solutions. Fixed buoys with cameras and radar to mark the river boundaries, and then uncrewed surface vehicles, USVs, patrolling the waters to deter any cross-waterway violations.
So to make any of this vast technological apparatus work, the final agreement has to be explicit. It has to treat any interference with the monitoring tech, especially electronic warfare jamming, as a direct ceasefire violation itself.
Yes. Transparency has to be protected at all costs. It's the only way to build any kind of trust. Hashtag outro. So if we synthesize everything we've looked at today, the core tension is tragically clear. You have this diplomatic pressure from the West for a quick fix peace colliding directly with Russia's calculated strategy of attrition and its maximalist demands.
An imperfect peace that lets Russia keep annexed territory, forces Ukraine into these irreversible military concessions like no NATO, and grants blanket amnesty. Well, that's not an end to the conflict. It just turns a temporary pause into a preparation period for the next offensive.
Exactly. A successful ceasefire isn't just about stopping the fighting today. It's about making the financial, political, and military cost of restarting that fight prohibitively high for Moscow tomorrow.
And if the deal fails to address Russia's fundamental strategic goals, which is to gain population and industry for a future fight with the West, we risk creating a temporary pause that all but guarantees the next war. And that is the true cost of settling for weakness.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.